Among the Wonderful is told in the alternating voices of its two heroes. One is a 7.5-foot tall woman who makes her living as a professional giantess, and you will now meet the second hero of the story. They had discarded the egret, and strangely, the lynx. As he approached the building, Émile Guilledot observed that someone had draped a burlap sack around the wild cat and left it on the sidewalk. But the covering had half fallen away, exposing taut feline shoulders poised for attack. Inside the museum, the lynx had inspired awe among the visitors. But against this new backdrop of street refuse, and in the bold morning light, the specimen had the look of a bleached house cat enchanted by a ball of dust. Until very recently, the changes had all been to the exterior of the building. The brick facade had disappeared under layers of whitewash, and teams of men had painted oval portraits across the face of the structure, depicting everything from elephants to the Annunciation. They had even rebuilt the balcony, and judging from the crowds that now filled it, this narrow promenade over Broadway was as entertaining as the museum's contents, if not more so. Guilledot did not appreciate the new owner's gaudy taste. He averted his eyes from the huge transparency at the museum entrance that bore the smiling, bare-breasted image of the museum's newest acquisition, a mermaid. In his irritated mind, he shuffled through the myriad upsets in routine that had occurred since that scoundrel had taken ownership. The new exhibits, the theater, the rooftop restaurant, and on each floor an army of concessionaires. The whole place was a roiling mess. He watched 3 men leave the building. One carried the white-faced ibis by the neck. The others struggled at each end of a reindeer. He did not betray even a hint of displeasure, though he felt an urgent desire to snatch back the ibis. The first visitors of the day formed a line outside the ticket window, and a vendor was selling them hot corn and coffee. Guilledot continued into the entrance hall, pushing through the inner door just behind a man and his daughter. "A Chinaman pulled her up in a net," the girl sang out as she skipped ahead of her father. "She's got hair mixed with seaweed and a necklace of pearls." The man hurried as the girl bounded up the first steps of the great marble stairway that led to the exhibits. She had holes in her stockings, and her father moved stiffly in a worn oilcloth coat. Guilledot walked past the door to his own office. Like the patrons, he had business on the second floor before the day's true work began. "Here, Margaret, this way," the father called. "I can almost see her." The girl's voice was frantic as she approached the exhibit. Guilledot heard the shriek, but he did not stop. He was already well aware that the desiccated horror that the girl now beheld was nothing like the siren depicted on the transparency. When he glanced toward them, the father was making the sign of the cross. His footsteps echoed as he walked across the portrait gallery where the blank faces of monarchs and presidents added their gazes to the empty air. At the far end, he turned left into Gallery 3. He found the sloth in its handsome pergola, sleeping high in the crook of a dead tree trunk. It squatted with its long arms folded around its legs and sunlight from the gallery's windows warming its back. Guilledot had hoped that by now a proper naturalist would have been hired. He resented the amount of his time that had been wasted worrying over the museum's newest inhabitants. "You're an odd sort of fellow," he said to the lump of gray-brown fur that acted as if sleeping in a museum were the thing one was born to do. In an absurdly languorous movement, the sloth raised its head. It lifted its arm and soundlessly scratched its armpit. How can an animal never come down to earth? Guilledot was unaccustomed to analyzing animal behavior, never having had to account for it during his 38 years as a taxidermist. Who wants a sloth in a museum anyway? He deposited the fresh lettuce leaves he'd brought inside the sloth's cage and went on his way. Phineas T. Barnum had inherited Guilledot along with the museum's collection of mounted specimens from John Scudder, the museum's original owner. Scudder had been Guilledot's benefactor, professional mentor, and closest friend. He still could not bear to think of his old companion signing over both of their lives' work to a man like Barnum. He had made a point of avoiding Scudder ever since the older man had relinquished the title to the collection. Guilledot had spoken with Barnum only twice. In the first conversation, Barnum praised the museum's taxidermy displays and assured Guilledot that his services were invaluable to any natural history enterprise. But he then proceeded to reinvent the museum, to add interest, he said, during their second conversation, while men hoisted the first of the transparencies outside. Anything outdated must be expunged. Guido half expected to be thrown out himself. He thought of his hero, the French anatomist Baron Georges Cuvier, whose discourse on the revolutionary upheavals on the surface of the globe had become a kind of mantra to Guido. Cuvier described long periods of equilibrium on the earth, during which whole kingdoms of plants and animals flourished. These epochs, though, ended in cataclysms of fire or flood. Out of the rubble of the old age would arise entirely new creatures to crawl and fly across the globe until the next apocalypse consumed them. As he read these words, Guido's mind filled with the image of a massive cyclone of wind and lightning, ripping up forests and carving great wounds in the earth. He had the uncomfortable sensation that Cuvier's theory explained more than just an ancient scenario. A dark whirlwind, he realized, had struck the museum in the form of Phineas T. Barnum. Thank you very much.